Imagine this. You are Marcus, a captured Gallic warrior, barely 19 years old, standing in the suffocating darkness beneath the Colosseum in the year 85 after Christ. The sand above your head trembles with the roar of 50,000 Romans screaming for blood. Your bare feet rest on stone slick with the bodily fluids of yesterday's dead. The iron collar around your neck bears the inscription, "I am a runaway. Return me to my master for reward." But today, that collar might be the least of your problems. The wooden gate creaks open, and harsh sunlight blinds you as you stumble into the arena. The crowd's roar becomes deafening. You can smell their excitement, their bloodlust, their anticipation of watching you die for their entertainment. What you don't know yet is that survival in this hellscape will require you to abandon every moral principle you once held sacred. You're about to discover that staying alive in the Colosseum meant becoming something worse than an animal. The strategies that kept slaves breathing for one more day would horrify modern audiences and shatter every assumption about honor, dignity, and human decency. Think gladiator movies showed you the reality of arena combat? Think again. The actual survival tactics employed by desperate slaves make Hollywood's bloodiest scenes look like children's playground games. Before we descend into these forgotten testimonies of survival and suffering, if you're drawn to learning about the buried truths of history, consider hitting that subscribe button. These silenced voices deserve to be heard, and there are countless more stories waiting to emerge from history's darkest corners. You're helping preserve these testimonies by staying connected to this journey through the shadows of the past. The Roman Colosseum wasn't just an arena for gladiatorial combat. It was a vast machine designed to process human suffering into public entertainment, where slaves faced a systematic horror that transformed desperate people into calculating predators. The underground tunnels beneath the arena floor contained a world of terror that spectators never witnessed, where survival meant abandoning humanity itself. Your first lesson in Colosseum survival would begin before you ever touched sand. The holding cells beneath the arena weren't just waiting rooms. They were laboratories for psychological warfare, where slaves learned that cooperation meant death and betrayal meant another sunrise. Veteran arena slaves would size you up within minutes, determining whether you could be useful, whether you posed a threat, or whether you were simply fresh meat for tomorrow's entertainment. The currency of survival wasn't strength or skill with weapons. It was information. Which guard could be bribed with sexual favors? Which trainers had gambling debts that made them susceptible to manipulation? Which other slaves were planning escape attempts that would bring deadly retribution on everyone? The slaves who lived longest weren't the strongest fighters. They were the most ruthless informants. But here's where survival in the Colosseum becomes truly disturbing. The arena masters had learned that desperate slaves would do literally anything to avoid the sand, and they exploited this desperation to create a system of collaboration that destroyed souls more efficiently than any sword. Slaves competed not just against wild animals and gladiators, but against each other in ways that would make modern psychological warfare look primitive. The trustee system gave certain slaves elevated positions in exchange for maintaining order among their fellow prisoners. These trustees received better food, cleaner quarters, and the promise of avoiding arena combat. But their payment came from the suffering of other slaves. They selected which prisoners would face the most dangerous animals, which would be given defective weapons, and which would be thrown to the crowd when crowd-pleasing deaths were needed. The trustees developed sophisticated methods for breaking the spirits of new arrivals: sleep deprivation through manufactured conflicts, contamination of food supplies, sexual assault as a tool of dominance, and psychological torture disguised as mentorship. A new slave who showed defiance might find his water ration mixed with human waste, his sleeping space invaded nightly by accidents, or his family members in other parts of the empire suddenly facing increased hardships through networks of slave informants. Arena veterinarians served a dual purpose that reveals the calculated cruelty of the system. They treated injuries to keep slaves alive for future entertainment, but they also provided another survival currency: slaves who could endure pain without screaming, who could withstand medical procedures without anesthesia, or who possessed unusual anatomical features could negotiate medical experimentation in exchange for delayed arena appearances. The medical experiments conducted on arena slaves went far beyond anything documented in official records. Roman physicians used the constant supply of expendable human subjects to test surgical procedures, poison antidotes, and pain tolerance studies. Slaves volunteered for these experiments because a 50% chance of dying on a medical table seemed preferable to a 90% chance of dying torn apart by lions. But the most disturbing survival strategy was the cultivation of entertainment value through deliberate self-mutilation and performance of extreme acts that would guarantee crowd engagement. Slaves learned that Romans craved novelty, and a fighter who could provide unique entertainment might earn enough crowd favor to survive multiple arena appearances. Self-scarification became a survival art form. Slaves would carefully inflict wounds that created dramatic visual effects without causing fatal damage. Cuts placed to produce maximum bleeding with minimal muscle damage. Burns designed to create permanent markings that made them recognizable to crowds, and deliberate breaking of bones in ways that created interesting fighting styles while preserving basic mobility. The development of signature fighting techniques often involved permanent physical modification. Slaves would deliberately damage their own vision to develop enhanced hearing that made them better fighters in stage darkness. Others would break their own fingers to create claw-like appendages that provided better gripping ability. Some even practiced controlled starvation to achieve the emaciated appearance that Roman crowds associated with dramatic underdog victories. Sexual performance became another avenue for survival that reveals the complete degradation of human dignity within the arena system. Both male and female slaves learned that providing intimate services to guards, trainers, and even other slaves could secure protection, better treatment, and information about upcoming arena schedules. But this wasn't simple prostitution. Arena slaves developed elaborate systems of sexual currency that involved group participation, public displays, and increasingly extreme acts designed to maintain their value in an environment where novelty was essential for survival. The underground chambers contained spaces specifically designed for these activities, with arrangements that allowed multiple participants and observers. Female slaves faced particular horrors as they learned to use pregnancy as a survival tool. Roman law prohibited executing pregnant women, so deliberate conception became a temporary reprieve from arena combat. But this protection came with its own nightmare. Pregnant arena slaves were often used for medical experiments related to childbirth, subjected to procedures that tested the limits of what a woman could endure while maintaining a viable pregnancy. The abortion and contraceptive knowledge that circulated among arena slaves was far more advanced than anything available to the general population. Women shared techniques for terminating pregnancies at strategic moments, for inducing miscarriages that appeared natural, and for maintaining the appearance of pregnancy long after actual conception had ended. Male slaves developed their own reproductive strategies that involved both collaboration and competition with female prisoners. The most valuable male slaves could demand sexual access to multiple women as part of their survival networks, creating complex hierarchies where reproductive success became another form of currency. Here's what makes these survival strategies truly horrifying. The arena masters encouraged all of these behaviors because they created a self-regulating system of control. Slaves who had compromised themselves through betrayal, sexual degradation, or collaboration couldn't return to normal society even if they somehow achieved freedom. They were permanently marked by their survival choices. The psychological profiles of long-term arena survivors show systematic destruction of normal human emotional responses. They lost the ability to form genuine relationships, developed pathological need for dominance over others, and exhibited sexual behaviors that continued the patterns of degradation they had learned underground. But survival in the Colosseum required more than just personal degradation. It demanded active participation in the suffering of others through complex alliance systems that would make modern prison gangs look like social clubs. The underground arena operated on principles of collective punishment, where the actions of one slave could determine the fate of dozens of others. Slaves were organized into collegia, groups of 10 to 20 prisoners who were held collectively responsible for each other's behavior. If one member of a collegium attempted escape, the entire group faced enhanced punishment. If one member failed to perform adequately in the arena, the group lost privileges. This system ensured that slaves policed each other with deadly efficiency. The collegium leaders, usually selected for their combination of intelligence and ruthlessness, wielded life-and-death authority over their group members. They decided who would receive medical treatment, who would be fed, who would have access to weapons training, and who would be sacrificed when the group needed to demonstrate loyalty to the arena masters. These leaders developed increasingly sophisticated methods for maintaining control. They created internal court systems where minor infractions were punished through group-administered beatings, sexual assault, or deliberate sabotage of an individual's arena equipment. The leaders could extend protection to favored group members while designating others for elimination through seemingly accidental injuries during training. The alliance networks between different collegia created a shadow political system beneath the Colosseum that rivaled the complexity of Roman senatorial politics. Different groups specialized in different survival strategies. Some focused on information gathering, others on smuggling, still others on providing sexual services or maintaining the underground infrastructure. Trade agreements between collegia involved exchanges of human beings as currency. A group with excess food might trade provisions for access to members of another group for sexual purposes. Groups with medical knowledge might exchange treatment for slaves who could provide information about upcoming arena events. The human trafficking networks that operated beneath the Colosseum created a secondary economy where people literally owned other people through complex debt arrangements. The most successful survival strategy required slaves to become entrepreneurs in human misery. They identified needs within the underground community and developed businesses to meet those needs through exploitation of other prisoners. The slave marketplace operated with its own currency, credit systems, and enforcement mechanisms. Weapon modification became a specialized trade where slaves with metalworking knowledge would alter arena equipment for other prisoners in exchange for protection, food, or sexual services. These modifications could mean the difference between life and death in combat, making the weaponsmiths incredibly valuable and dangerous to other slaves. Drug manufacturing represented another underground economy where slaves produced substances that could enhance performance, reduce pain, or provide psychological escape. These primitive steroids and painkillers were created from smuggled plants, stolen medical supplies, and bodily fluids from various sources. The slave chemists who produced these substances commanded significant respect and resources. Information brokerage created networks of intelligence that extended beyond the Colosseum into the broader Roman world. Slaves developed systems for gathering and selling information about political events, military campaigns, and social developments that could affect arena scheduling, crowd preferences, or opportunities for escape. But perhaps the most disturbing entrepreneurial activity was the slave breeding operations that developed within the underground community. Long-term arena slaves who had established themselves in positions of relative safety began treating reproduction as a business opportunity, creating arrangements where they controlled sexual access and pregnancy outcomes for profit. The arena masters not only tolerated these underground economies, they actively encouraged them because desperate slaves who had invested in survival through exploitation of others would fight harder to maintain their positions. A slave who owned other slaves through debt arrangements, who controlled sexual access within his collegium, or who operated successful businesses in human misery, had powerful incentives to collaborate with the system rather than resist it. The transformation of survival instincts into predatory behavior wasn't accidental. It was a carefully designed system of psychological conditioning that created the most efficient possible machine for human entertainment. By the time slaves had developed successful survival strategies, they had become willing participants in their own degradation and the destruction of other human beings. Escape attempts, when they occurred, revealed the complete corruption of the underground community. Slaves who had spent months or years building survival networks rarely attempted to flee, because escape meant abandoning their investments in human suffering. The most successful arena slaves had too much to lose by leaving. When escape plans did develop, they were usually betrayed by other slaves who calculated that reporting resistance activities would earn them rewards that outweighed the risks of eventual punishment. The underground information networks that helped slaves survive also made large-scale resistance virtually impossible. The psychological conditioning that enabled survival in the Colosseum created permanent changes in human personality that persisted long after arena combat ended. Former arena slaves who achieved freedom through crowd favor, political intervention, or successful escape showed consistent patterns of behavior that marked them as fundamentally different from other human beings. They maintained the alliance systems and exploitation networks they had developed underground, creating criminal organizations that operated according to arena principles. They showed pathological inability to form trusting relationships, compulsive need to dominate others sexually and economically, and complete absence of empathy for human suffering. The sexual behaviors learned in the arena continued throughout their lives, with former slaves seeking increasingly extreme forms of stimulation and showing preference for situations that involved dominance, humiliation, and group participation. They often became involved in the slave trade themselves, using their knowledge of psychological conditioning to break new captives more efficiently. But here's what makes the Colosseum survival strategies particularly horrifying for modern audiences. These weren't desperate measures undertaken by people who had lost their moral compass. They were rational responses to systematic dehumanization that worked exactly as intended by their designers. The slaves who survived longest in the arena weren't those who maintained their dignity and humanity. They were those who abandoned moral principles most completely and embraced their transformation into predators. The system rewarded cruelty, exploitation, and degradation, while ensuring that maintaining human decency was literally a death sentence. The entertainment value that Roman crowds derived from arena combat wasn't just from watching death and violence. It was from witnessing the systematic destruction of human souls in real time. The crowds could observe the gradual transformation of people into monsters, and that transformation was more compelling than any simple gladiatorial combat. Modern audiences who think they understand arena entertainment through Hollywood movies have missed the most disturbing element. The real entertainment wasn't the fighting. It was watching human beings abandon their humanity for survival, knowing that those who maintained their moral principles would die quickly, while those who embraced degradation might live to fight another day. The slave survivors who emerged from the Colosseum carried within their bodies and minds the evidence of what human beings will do to other human beings when survival depends on abandoning moral constraints. They became living testimonies to the systematic destruction of human dignity through carefully designed incentive structures. The underground community beneath the Colosseum represented a complete alternative society where every normal human relationship had been corrupted into a transaction involving exploitation, domination, or degradation. Love became strategic alliance, friendship became information exchange, sexuality became currency, and survival became a business that required destroying other people. The efficiency of this system reveals something terrifying about human nature and social organization. When survival depends on cruelty, people will develop sophisticated methods for inflicting suffering on others. When social status requires exploitation, human beings will create elaborate hierarchies based on their ability to dehumanize their neighbors. The Colosseum wasn't just a place where people died for entertainment. It was a laboratory for studying the complete corruption of human social organization under extreme pressure. The survival strategies that emerged from this environment demonstrate the possibility of creating societies where moral behavior becomes literally impossible. As we emerge from this journey into one of history's darkest chapters, we must confront uncomfortable truths about the persistence of these dynamics in modern contexts. The same psychological principles that governed survival in the Colosseum operate wherever human beings face extreme desperation under systematic oppression. The alliance systems, information networks, sexual economies, and entrepreneurial exploitation that characterized arena survival can be observed in modern prisons, refugee camps, human trafficking operations, and other environments where survival depends on abandoning moral principles. The specific tactics may evolve, but the underlying human responses remain consistent across time and culture. Understanding Colosseum survival strategies helps us recognize similar patterns of systematic dehumanization in contemporary contexts and resist the social pressures that transform ordinary people into willing participants in the suffering of others. The slaves who died maintaining their dignity in the arena deserve recognition not just as victims, but as heroes who chose death over moral corruption. The slaves who survived through cruelty and exploitation deserve understanding as people who faced impossible choices in a system designed to destroy human decency. Their stories remind us that survival itself can become a form of defeat when it requires abandoning the principles that make life worth living. The Roman crowds who cheered for arena entertainment believed they were civilized people enjoying sophisticated cultural events. They failed to recognize that they were witnessing and applauding the systematic destruction of human souls. Their entertainment was built on suffering so extreme that it corrupted not just the participants, but the entire society that made it possible. Standing in the blood-stained sand where Marcus once fought for his life, we can understand his terror not just as personal fear of death, but as recognition of the moral destruction that survival would require. He carried the weight of knowing that staying alive meant becoming complicit in a system that destroyed everything human about existence. The Colosseum reminds us that civilization is fragile, and that the capacity for systematic evil exists within every human society. The arena slaves, who developed increasingly sophisticated methods for exploiting each other, weren't fundamentally different from modern people facing similar pressures. Their choices reveal what we are all capable of when survival depends on abandoning our humanity. But their resistance, when it occurred, also reveals the enduring power of human dignity, even under the most extreme oppression. The slaves who chose death over degradation, who maintained compassion despite systematic incentives for cruelty, who refused to abandon their moral principles even when those principles guaranteed suffering, represent the highest expression of human courage. These voices from history remind us why understanding the past matters for navigating the present. If this exploration into the depths of human experience has revealed truths that challenge your understanding of civilization and moral choice, subscribe to continue this journey together. There are countless more stories buried in history's archives, waiting for someone willing to bear witness to both the worst and best of human nature. The Colosseum stands today as a monument not just to Roman engineering and entertainment, but to the eternal struggle between survival and dignity that defines human existence. The slaves who fought and died in its bloody sand deserve remembrance not just as victims of an ancient system, but as mirrors reflecting the moral choices that every generation must make when faced with systematic pressure to abandon their humanity. Click that subscribe button to ensure these testimonies reach others who need to understand the full spectrum of human experience. These buried voices deserve to be heard, and there are many more stories waiting to be told about the price of survival when staying alive means losing your soul.